Hi, and welcome to Art with Mrs. Torres. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a very special friend of mine. He has been in my life for a very long time. He is excited to meet you. I think he just peed in my hands. He's full of warts and wrinkles. He's got bumpy skin, and his name is Blinker. This is Blinker. Blinker has been in our family since my son was 8 years old. My son is now 30 years old. So 30 minus 8 is how old? 22 years. Blinker has lived in our family for 22 years. Do you know that a California toad can only live 10 to 12 years in the wild? Why has he lived 22 years? I think today would be a fun day to honor Blinker by drawing a picture of a California toad. What do you think of that? Do you want to do that, Blinker? Did you hear him? I think he does. So let's get ready to do our fun art lesson today. I can't wait to teach you about Blinker, the California toad. Well, let's get ready to draw our California toad. For today's project, we are going to be using two different pieces of paper. The first piece of paper is just the paper that's going to come out of your printer, where you need it nice and thin. You are going to need another piece of paper. Now, that can be any color piece of construction paper, blue, brown, green. I chose brown for mine. Now, if you don't have colored construction paper, just grab another piece of paper that comes out of the printer and you can scribble on it later to make your background. Now, for my coloring of my background, I used oil pastels because I had them. But if you don't have oil pastels, you could use crayons. You need something that you can color to make earth tones. So crayons or oil pastels will work great for that. You are going to for sure need crayons though. And the crayons are what we're going to be using to color our toad today. So you definitely want crayons. If you have oil pastels, you can use those for your background. But for the toad, you're going to need crayons today. You're going to need a pencil. You're going to need an eraser, a Sharpie marker, and a pair of scissors and a glue stick. So go ahead and gather up these items and then meet me back here and we will start our project. So we're going to use a white piece of paper, just the kind that comes out of your printer. It's nice and thin, and we're going to start to sketch out our toad. Now you can keep your eraser near you. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a very large oval for his body, saving some room for his feet. So I'm just going to place it like this and draw a nice fat oval. We want them nice and big. And then I'm going to draw an intersecting oval for his face up here. I'm going to erase the line inside of his face because I don't need that anymore. Okay, now we're going to draw his eyes up above his head. And when I'm drawing his eyes, I want you to notice they're kind of like teddy bear ears right up on top. And then right here in between, we're going to give him a little bump on each side and a little split down the middle. Give him a little nostril on both sides. And then we're going to kind of round this curve of his face out on both sides. Now, when you look at my toad, Blinker, his mouth is very short up here. His lip is really almost right underneath his nose, but he has a huge chin. So what I'm going to do is make a little curved line on this side and a little curved line on this side. And then I'm going to start right here underneath his nose and just make a little dot where I want my mouth to come up to, and I'm going to connect it like this. So as you're curving it up and around, that way I'll end up still looking kind of happy, but he's going to have that big fat chin. Underneath his chin right here, I'm going to add just a kind of a curve line for the underside of his chin. And then I'm going to come down here and start to create his body and his shoulders and his arms. So I'm going to give him a little bit fatter shoulders on both sides. And I'm going to extend his arm all the way around. So I'm going to kind of loop it around on this side. And I'm going to match it on this side by just kind of looping it around in the front. And then I'm going to extend his arm out like this, kind of like he has a little muscle. I'd usually do side to side. And then I'm going to bring out his wrist right here and here. And then right here, I'm going to draw his little armpit. And this is where I'm going to create his hands. So how I do his hands is as I start on the back of his wrist here and I draw one line that comes out. So I'm going to do the same thing on here, one line that comes out. And then here, I'm going to bring one line that kind of swoops in. And in this big space here is where I'm going to add 4 fingers. So I usually draw a little half circle like this, just to help me get the proportions down. And now I'm going to figure out where I want to do the other 2 fingers. So I'm going to draw one here, maybe one here. So one here, one here. So now I've got my area where I want to draw his fingers. And I just connect them. I make one loop and then I come around and make the second loop around that place there. The next loop here, and then the final one here. So there's his first hand. And then I do the second one the same way. 1, connect, 2, connect, 3, connect. So now that I got his hands, I can erase the circle in here. And now I can move on to his back legs. So for his back legs, I'm just going to fill this area out a little more full. It's just going to kind of match what I did here. And then for his back feet, I'm going to give him 3 toes. They actually have 5, but you can't see them all. So I'm going to draw one line here and then one line here. And on this side, I'm going to do the same thing. One line here and one line there. And then I'm going to draw 3 toes in this gap here. So I'm going to make one kind of big toe, bring it back, second toe, and a third toe. So actually, on a toad's foot, their toes are much chubbier than a frog's, and their arms are chubbier than a frog's too. Frogs have skinny arms, toads have fat arms. And then of course they have big bumps like warts on their body. So I want you to go up here on his shoulders right here and give him a couple big lumps, kind of like a big drip like that. Just make a couple big lumps on his body. And we can also draw like little circles like this that we can go over with a marker later, just to make a little mark on his body. Now we're going to work on his eyes. So for his eyes, he has an upper eyelid, a lower eyelid, and then he has a third eyelid, which is called a nictitating eyelid, or a membrane, excuse me. So how we're going to do this is we're going to draw an upper eyelid like this and bring it in. I'm going to match it on this side, upper eyelid up and bring it in. And then the lower eyelid, I'm just going to draw a kind of a football shape that comes all the way around here. And then I'm going to put just his highlight right here in the middle. I'm just going to draw kind of an oval shape here and here for the highlight of his eye. And then I'm going to add a little extra twinkle in his eye right down here. So when you're finished with that, you just want to make sure that your lines all make sense, that he doesn't have one leg bigger than the other. And then we're going to give him a little wrinkle in his tummy right here. So I'm just going to add a couple little rolls for his chubby little tummy. Maybe a little one in there. And maybe a little wrinkle here in his neck. Then we're going to go over our lines with our Sharpie marker. So now I will go in with my Sharpie marker and trace over all of my lines. So you can go ahead and do that too. So as you're tracing over your lines, you want to work nice and quick. The faster that you work with that marker, the cleaner your lines are going to be. You want to have an extra piece of paper underneath you when you're working. Also, that really helps that you don't leak ink onto the back, which would then sometimes get on your desk. So I'm just going to trace over all of my lines, and then I'm going to erase my pencil lines. So I'm going to pause my video and work on that. You go ahead and finish inking your picture, and then we'll go and do our next part of the project. So I'll meet you back here in just a second. Okay, I am done with my inking. I'm just erasing most of my pencil lines. To be honest with you, most of it's going to all get covered up by our crayon anyway. But if there's any that are just a little bit too dark that you think would maybe show up and that you don't want to be there, go ahead and erase those. All right, now it's going to be the fun part. So we are going to be using crayons today, but we're not going to be staying inside. We're actually going to be going outside with our crayons. So before we do that, I'm going to gather up the colors that I am going to be needing. So in looking at my toad, first thing I am going to need is probably a yellow. So I'm going to get a yellow. I'm going to need a light green. And by the way, if you have any crayons that don't have wrappers, these work great. So if you have any crayons that are old, that are in your box that don't have any paper on them, those are fabulous to use. I'm also going to need a brown, which I'm going to have to dig around and look for. That color is always being used. And I'm going to need a black. I know that for sure. And maybe a dark green would be nice. So once you have all the colors in your colors that you want to work with, then what we're going to do is we're going to take our crayons outside and we're going to find a bumpy surface. We're going to take our piece of paper, put it on top of a bumpy surface, and we're going to get this really neat texture by rubbing our crayon onto our paper. So wrappers off or wrappers on, either way will work great. So go ahead and gather up those crayons, but for sure look for a brown. I got to dig in my box and find a brown, and then I'll show you our next step in just a minute. So now I'm outside. I found a rough surface. This is just our backyard, kind of the sidewalk. And you could use a sidewalk. You could use the side of your house. And now I'm going to take this crayons. I've got a couple that are peeled and I have a couple that aren't. And I'm going to start with a light color first. So I'm going to go in with my yellow, and I'm just going to scribble some yellow all over my toad just to put a base coat down. And you don't have to really worry about staying inside the lines because we're going to be cutting them out. So isn't that nice? We don't really have to worry about that. I'm just going to go in, give him a nice dark coat of this yellow. So you can already see that there's some texture here, right? Well, what you want to do is every time you switch colors, you're going to move the paper. So now I'm just going to pick it up and set it down into a different location. And now I'm going to go in with another color. So this time I'm going to try some light green, and I'm going to cover my toad. And since I have my crayon peeled, I can do it a little faster. So I can rub it over the entire toad. I'm kind of skipping the eyeball area, but you can go over it if you want to. But I'm going to be doing that with a black crayon later when I'm on a smooth surface. You can hear all my wind chimes in the background. It's such a beautiful day today. So now you'll notice that the green shows up and the yellow shows up, but you always want to pick up your paper and set it back down again, because every time you set it down, you're going to hit a different surface, a little bit different area. So now I'm going to take the tip of my green crayon and I'm going to add some shading by just pressing on the edges of the arm and around the sides. So you see that I'm kind of making it a little bit more heavy coated, a little darker on the edges. And now I'm going to concentrate on making it a little darker up here on his upper lip. So I know you probably couldn't see when I was holding blinker, but the top of his face is darker and the underside here is lighter. So I'm going to make it a little bit darker just by pressing a little bit more with my crayon. I'm just using a light green. And now I'm going to move on to a darker green. So I've got this crayon here. I haven't peeled this one, so I'm just going to use the end of it. And now I'm going to concentrate by using the darker green around the sides. So I kind of want it a little bit lighter in the center of the arm and a little bit darker on the sides. I think I forgot to pick up my paper. Let me pick it up and scooch it over a little bit. Always want to move it because then you'll get a different texture. There's different bumps wherever you place it. So this is a great technique if you're doing any kind of animal or amphibian that's got a bumpy textured surface. But if you were drawing like a lizard of some sort, how fun to just bring your paper outside or on the side of your home. You could do it on the side of your wall of your house. You just want to make sure that you don't get crayon on your house. Now I'm making it darker on the sides and make it a little darker on the top of his face. And very carefully on his upper eyelid and his lower eyelid. So right now he really looks like a frog because my toad is brown. He's green and brown. So I want to add now some brown shade to him. So I've got just a plain old brown crayon. This is one of my old ones. It was broken. I left it in a Ziploc bag. So now I'm going to go in and, oops, what did I forget to do? Pick up my paper and move it to a new location. So now I'm going to take my brown and I'm going to go in and add a layer of brown. So you want to put that brown everywhere, not just on the edges. I'm going to put a coat all over him. Wow, he is really starting to look like my toad Blinker. Blinker is not green. He is like a army green, kind of a brownish green. Blinker was little, he was just green, but he was so tiny. When he was born, he was about the size of my fingernail right there. That was how tiny he was. We used to have to feed him pinhead crickets, these little tiny, tiny crickets that we would have to special order from the pet store. They didn't have them in the store. You had to order them. Okay, so now I've got my brown in there. I'm gonna concentrate on making it a little darker now, just around the sides of his arms and the sides of his body, on the bottoms of his feet, just to add kind of a little shadow. And then I'm going to go in with one last color, and that's black. So my black is going to be my shading color. I'm not going to put this all over him. I'm just going to put it around the sides of him. So it's going to make my brown a little darker brown. I'm going to pick up my paper and shift it one more time. And I'm adding my black now as a shading, just to make it a little darker. And I really want to kind of accent those little warty bumps on his. So I'm going to kind of put some shading on those at the bottom of each one of those little wart bumps. So he's really starting to come together. This little wrinkle underneath his chin. We put a little shading there. And a little shading right under his lip. And this little crack in the center of his nose, right up here, his nostrils. So now we're going to go in, we're going to put a smooth coat over him with a different color, but we're going to have to go back to our desk and work on that part. So we're going to leave this area and we're going to go back in and we're going to put a smooth coat over this, one more base coat. So I'm going to pick up my stuff and I'll meet you back inside for our next part of our lesson. Okay, that was fun, right? So now we're back inside. And now what we're going to do is we're going to color over our bumpy surface just to slightly blend the colors together using one base coat color. Now, that can be yellow. That could be kind of a neutral color like a light tan or a skin color. That's the color I'm going to be using. But any kind of light color. I wouldn't color over it in green because we really don't want our toad to be green. We want him to have a little bit more brown or earth tones. Matter of fact, you could even use brown, but it would be a little dark. I'm going to be working with this cream color, but I can always go back in and add a little brown over it. So I'm just going to take my crayon. My wrapper is starting to fall off of this one, but you do not need to take a wrapper off of your crayon. You could just use the end of it, but mine's already breaking apart. So all I'm going to do now is go from side to side, blending this color. So since I'm a lefty, I'm turning my paper this way, and I'm just going to use it across my color, and you'll notice it's almost like a blending tool. What it starts to do is kind of meld those colors together. But if you notice, there's still a bumpy texture, but it's just adding one more layer. So let me show you as I do this across his chin, how the colors just start to kind of mix together a little bit, but yet they still have that rough texture. I'm going to do this across the whole toad, all the way down. And because we are going to be cutting out our toad, you can go right past the edges. See my final little step. We'll color his eyes in a minute. Right now he looks kind of weird. Looks like a zombie. Okay, so now that I have that color in there, I really like that little surface texture. He still looks lighter in the middle, a little darker on the edges. Now you can go in with your brown if you want to, and just kind of darken the sides, give him a little shading, a little bit more shading if you want to. You could also do it with your black, just if there's any areas that you want to show up a little bit more, especially around those warts, those big lumps on his back. I like those to kind of really pop. And then for his eyes, I'm just going to go in with my Sharpie marker. You could also use your crayon. You could use a black colored pencil. I'm just going to use my Sharpie and color in his pupils. So see, I'm just going in. I'm going to leave that little highlight showing. Now we'll go in and cut out our toad. So I'm going to get my scissors, and you go ahead and get your scissors. Be careful. We're going to do our best cutting, hopefully, and I'll meet you back here when you're done. The last part of my cutting, I just want to show you when I'm cutting his toes out, when you get into this little narrow area here, I usually do two separate cuts. I cut one in, then I pull my scissors out, and then I come in from a different direction and cut the second cut. That way I can get kind of into that sharp little area here, and then you can kind of trim the little rounded part off at the end. So watch again as I do this part right here. So I come in on one side and I cut, and I pull my scissors out, and I come in now from the other side and cut. That piece will fall out, and that way you don't end up tearing your paper trying to bend your scissors in that narrow spot. But don't worry, even if you were to tear it or you accidentally cut one of the toes off, when we glue it down later, you can hide a multitude of mistakes with the grass that we're going to make. So I'll show you that later. All right, so save your scraps, don't throw them away. We're going to use our little paper scraps for grass. So now my toad is done. I'm going to scoot him off to the side. And now I'm going to go in, get rid of all these little pieces. And I'm going to use this to make some grass. So you're going to decide whether you want your grass to be long strands or if you want your strands to be short. So I'm going to make some long strands. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use oil pastels or crayons. And if you don't have oil pastels, just grab your crayons, and you're going to make long strands of green, dark green, light green, and even yellow. So all I'm going to do is scribble up and down. So let me show you what it will look like with crayon. I'm going to do this side with crayon. And then I'll do my other paper with oil pastel so you can see the difference. Now, the only thing I do like about crayon over oil pastel is that crayon is never sticky. It doesn't get on your hands, and oil pastel is a little messier. And I'm going to add some brown. I'm going to add a little black just to kind of break it up. Okay, so now I'm going to color this side with oil pastel so you can see the difference. So I can start with yellow. So first off, you'll just notice the colors are a little bit more vibrant. Light green. Dark green is definitely darker. So you can really see, you don't have to press very hard. And then brown is definitely a lot darker. They both have great colors, but they're different. So all you need to do is just scribble, because we're going to be cutting some strips out to make grass later. So pause the video and take your scraps and whatever you have, whether it's crayons or oil pastel, just scribble, scribble, scribble. And then later we'll turn it into grass. Okay, so now in order to make some blades of grass that are going to come up from the bottom of the paper, all you have to do is just take your paper, and if you're working with oil pastel, you're going to have to clean your hands because it will get a little dirty. You're just going to take your scissors, and the first thing you want to do is cut it so that the base, the bottom of the leaves have color on them. As you can see, I didn't color all the way to the edge, so I just want it nice to have a nice clean edge that's full of color. And then you're just going to come up to the top here, and you're going to start making some slices in. So I'm going to cut off just the top so I can get down into this. And I'm just going to start to cut down almost to the bottom. I'm going to come back up here and cut a skinny strip. And I want you to see this strip that I'm cutting. So it's skinny, but now I need to cut a little gap before I cut the next blade of grass. And let me show you why. If I just go right in here and cut another blade of grass, when I set this down later onto the surface, since there's no gap between here, they're not going to show up. You have to kind of make a little extra cut just to separate them. So all you have to do is once you cut two blades of grass, just go in and take a little bit, shave a little bit off one of them. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off of this one. So now there's a space between them. You see that little space right there? So now you can see the separation between those two blades of grass. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut a little bit away from this side now. I'm just going to sliver off a little piece, let it fall onto the thing. And now I have a gap there. So now I can make another blade of grass. And this grass can be either taller or shorter. Matter of fact, I'll cut that all the way off so you can see it. So you can see I have a couple blades of grass now. Probably doesn't really show up very good against this green paper. Let me find some white paper so I can show it to you. So now you can see it better. See that? Okay, so what I want you to do is just cut off some strips like this, make some blades of grass, and you're going to save those for later. So you can make little chunks like this. I'm just going to make a few different ones with my paper, and I want you to make a few. You only need a couple. That's what we're going to kind of tuck in between his toes. And I'll meet you back here when you're done. Okay, welcome back. Now you have to find your background paper. Now we talked about that at the very beginning, what color you might be wanting to use. So since I am using oil pastels, I can go with something a little darker, like a dark brown. But if you are going to be working with crayons, you might want to go with something like this, a little cream color or a white piece of paper, or even the green would work. You could even do the crayons on the green paper. So if you have a green background, you could use crayons on that just perfectly. But let me just show you what we're going to be doing. So basically, whether you're using crayon or oil pastels, you're going to find all the same colors that you used in your toad, and you're going to scribble them all over your background paper. And I mean everywhere. You just want to scribble everywhere. Just go crazy. Make sure you have a background behind you, because as you're doing this, it's going to get onto your desk and you don't want to make a big mess. So you can start with any color. You can go any direction. Once you've filled it with a lot of scribbles, then you're going to move on to a different color. So now I'm working with yellow. Yellow changes colors on the oil pastel as it goes over the other colors. So you really want to just kind of have fun. Now I'm going to go in with some green. Ooh, the green changes color once it goes over the yellow. Try some dark colors in there. Add a little black or dark green to break up all the colors that are monotonous and kind of all the same shade. You want to break it up a little bit, and then you want to put a little pop of a light color over it. So now let me see what I've got that's light in here. I could go in with a putty color or a white. I've already done yellow, so one of these colors would be great. And when you're finished, then you're going to place your toad on top. Doesn't that look fun? But we're not quite done yet, because now we're going to go in and we're going to add our little blades of grass. So this is kind of where you get to experiment. So do you want like his leg kind of poking out? Do you want one of his toes poking out from inside the blade of grass? How do you want to set your grass pieces up? And then once you have placed them around your toad, he's going to look like he's actually hiding in the forest, or wherever the toads reside. Look at how cute that turned out. So I hope you had fun today learning about the California toad. I had so much fun teaching you. So my toad Blinker, as I mentioned earlier, is 22 years old. I was reading, and one toad that they discovered was 39 years old. That would mean Blinker might live another 17 years. Oh my goodness, that is an old toad. I hope you had fun, and I will see you for our next lesson. Have a great day.